This video will be for a shirt sleeve placket. So we will have, this is a miniature version of the type of sleeve that you have on perhaps a dress shirt, like the one we'll be making for our final project. And we have this slit going into it. So this is a cut in the fabric that needs to be finished somehow. And that's where our cuff opening will be. So that slit allows the sleeve to open so that you can get your hand through. And then the cuff closes it so that the cuff is fitted to your wrist area. So we need to finish this with a bias strip. So we have our bias strip piece here as well. Those are the two pieces you'll need to cut out of fabric. Also, you can see down here we have two sets of notches with an arrow in between each. Those are two pleats that we will fold towards the end of the demonstration. So the first thing we need to do is cut into that slit. I've got my slit marked here. I need to cut into that. We're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowances all the way around. So I'm going to mark my seam allowances around the top of this slit so that I can cut over to the corners without cutting past my stitch line. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark a 1/4 inch line on either side of the slit. And then also mark a 1/4 inch line above the slit. So it should create this little rectangle going around the top edge of your slit. Just like that. So now I'm going to cut up my slit and then over to the corners, so it should make a Y shape, over to those corners without going past my chalk line. And this is going to allow us to open up that slit so that we can stitch in it. So cut up the slit, now over to the corner of the chalk line. I'll hold that up so you can see what that looks like. There we go. So that allows us again to open this up into more of a straight line for us to stitch on. So I'm going to open that up and then I'm going to grab my bias strip, place it right side down on top of my shirt, so it should be right sides of fabric touching each other. And pin the raw edge of my bias strip should be matching up with that slit across the shirt. Pin those two together. So start at either end, match up the corner, and work your way towards the middle. I'm going to pin from the shirt side because we have this big amount of fullness at the top of the slit that we'll have to work around. So it's a little bit easier to see what you're doing if you're pinning from that shirt side. So again, work my way to the center where that fullness is. So did that side. Now I'll work my way towards the center on the other side. So now I have everything pinned except for this very center portion where the fullness is. So at that center portion, I should have my little triangle sticking up right here that we cut at the top of the slit. There's a little triangle. The tip of that triangle should come all the way to the raw edge of my fabric. And then I'm going to split my fullness into two areas on either side. So if you can see that here, there's fullness on this side and then fullness on this side as well. So I've split that in two. My triangle is laying flat and the tip of my triangle is coming right to the raw edge. Okay, here's a better shot of that pinning. So these are the slits at the corners, here and here. My fullness is split in two, with the tip of my triangle coming to the edge of my fabric. Okay, these two layers are now ready to get attached. So I'm going to start at one end and stitch them together at 1/4 inch. When we get to the center, I'll show you how to work your way around that fullness without it turning into a pleat or a tuck. So we will work our way all the way up until that fullness, that first pleat that's coming up right here. So once I get to that, I like to start hand cranking my wheel. So I'm going to take my foot off the pedal and just slowly hand crank it one stitch at a time so that I have as much control around this little center area as possible. So this fullness will need to get rotated towards the back of your needle as you go. I'm going to pick it up and slowly lift up my foot, rotate just a little bit of the fullness towards the back of the needle so that I create a little flat spot right in front of my needle. And I can take one stitch by hand. And I'll do that with each stitch. Slowly rotate this fullness to the back. Until I've got that full pleat out of the way. Now I can take another stitch or two till I make it to the other pleat. Once I am at that second pleat, again, start rotating it to the back, taking one stitch at a time to avoid tucks. Okay, so once all of that is behind your needle, you should have a clear area to finish out with a straight stitch. So right there in the center, we went across that area. The pleats start just after my stitch line, but my stitch line is completely flat with no tucks. Now we're ready to start pressing this. Okay, so when I lay my sleeve out, I've got the bias strip now stitched to that slit area, and I'm going to open that up and leaving the seam allowances sticking off the edge, I'm going to flip my bias strip off the edge as well. So from the front, your bias strip is sticking off the edge. From the back, you can see the seam allowances and the bias strip all sticking off the edge of the shirt. Press those. So again, I like to start with the straight edges and work my way towards the center. So from the back side of my sleeve, I've got that fully pressed. Now I'm going to fold my bias strip around my seam allowances. So right where that raw edge of your seam allowance begins, you're going to fold it so that it wraps around those seam allowances. And you're folding it towards the wrong side, the inside of your sleeve, the wrong side of your fabric. This is where you're establishing the shape of your bias strip and how wide it will be. So once you've got it pressed, double check from the front side that it is a consistent 1/4 inch wide. So when I flip this over to the front side, that bias strip should be sticking off the edge, and it should be a consistent 1/4 inch all the way across. Once I'm satisfied with the width of the bias strip, I can fold under this raw edge here and cover up the previous stitch line, so I can see my stitch line right there. I'm going to fold under my raw edges and just cover up that stitch line so that we can stitch in the ditch from the front and catch the back of this bias strip. Okay, so from the back side, I've got my bias strip edges are all tucked in, and it's just barely covering up that previous stitch line. From the front, I've got that consistent 1/4 inch width. Now we're ready to go stitch in the ditch here on the front hand side, and it will catch the back of our bias strip. Okay, let's pin this with our particular pinning that we do for stitch in the ditch. From the front, I'm going to put my pin directly in the seam line. And on the back, I want to make sure that it's catching that bias strip. That's the most efficient way to make sure that when you stitch in that seam line, your needle will actually be catching the bias strip on the back. My little raw edges are just wanting to pop up on me a little bit, so get those folded back down. There we go. I pin these pretty close together because, like I said, that raw edge on the back side likes to try and unfold on you. So I pin them pretty close together so that we have as much control as we need. Okay, now I'm ready to stitch in the ditch. Start with my needle right in that ditch line. Needle goes down first and then foot afterwards so that I have an accurate starting point. When you get to the center of the slit, again, you'll just have to make sure that you rotate that fullness back out of the way, which should be a bit easier this time because you've already, established a stitch line with no tucks in it. So you're just following that same stitch line and rotating that fullness to the back. Okay, double check that your seam line has stayed inside this, or that your stitch line has stayed inside the seam the entire time, that you didn't create any tucks at the center, and then it's catching the strip on the back. Now we're ready to fold this towards the inside of our sleeve. So here it is sticking off the front of the sleeve. I'm just going to fold it towards the inside of the sleeve here, and it should be folded in half to where the bias strip is sticking off the edge of your sleeve. Now we're going to do a little diagonal stitch across that folded edge to create a V point on the top of our placket and to keep this folded on the inside so that it doesn't flip to the outside of our garment. So I'm going to start at that inside edge and work my way down and out. And it's just going to be long enough to be a back stitch. It's a very short stitch line. So from that folded edge out. Do you have a question for me? Okay, once I turn it to the outside of my garment, now I can see where that's coming up to a V point at the top of the placket. When I lay this flat, we're going to go and press it. Okay, so here's my placket. Lay that flat on the table. This left-hand side is going to get folded on top of the other placket. So fold it over. It should sit on top. It's folded towards the inside of the sleeve. The other one is sticking off the edge of the sleeve. Make sure that seam where you attach the bias strip is right on the folded edge. And you can press that. So now, once I've done that, it should look like a pleat in the sleeve. So it's a little hidden placket inside our pleat. You can go ahead and partially press that pleat So we usually press it about halfway up the sleeve and then let it release after that. So press just the top part of that pleat so it makes a nice smooth line from the placket up. And now I'm ready to press my other 2 pleats over. So I've got one set of notches here. The arrow on the pattern was pointing towards my placket. So I'm going to take that inside notch and bring it over to the notch closest to my placket. And that will form 1 pleat. And then do the same thing with the second set of notches. That outside notch comes towards the inside of the placket and creates a 3rd pleat. So this will be 2 pleats, and that 3rd pleat is a hidden placket. We'll press those halfway up the sleeve just like we did the first one. So looking just like this. Now I'm going to baste across those to keep those pleats folded down. That will be the end of this demonstration for your notebook, but if this was on a garment, we would attach our cuff here at the bottom and it would permanently stitch those pleats down so that they can't unfold. But for now, we'll just baste across them. Okay, so here I've got my placket with my 2 folded pleats. So now we need to just baste down those pleats, and that placket that we pressed towards the inside of the sleeve, we're going to baste across that as well, just to keep all that pressed and folded until we're able to get our cuff on. So the other side of the placket should be out of the way. We're not basting across that. Keep that out of the way. We're just basting across the left-hand side of the placket and the 2 pleats. We'll do this at a 1/2 inch. Go up to a 4 for a basting. And then work your way across those 2 pleats. Once you get across there, you are good to pull it out and trim your threads. So there's our finished baseline, 2 pleats, and our placket is folded towards the inside there. The other side of our sleeve has the placket sticking off. So there is our completed sleeve placket sample for the shirt.